Hello there, Twisters, and welcome to a special Twisted Wrister podcast coming from Bend, Oregon. And I'm recording this outside because it is a lovely day here in late May. You might hear some sounds of nature, or you might hear my dog in the background here. She's been loving it. I'm at a vacation home, not my own, but just renting it out, and I'm just surrounded by forest, and it's beautiful. So couldn't think of a better way to get away here. I've been very fortunate to still have work and can do that remotely. So this has kind of been the best of the situation that I can make of this. Anyway, I wanted to take this podcast to talk a little bit about my evolution as a hockey fan and really start back from when I was a kid and kind of go through the years. I won't try to drag on too long. And in the comments below, let me know if you have any other questions or topics that you'd like me to cover about kind of my background, and maybe I can do a special podcast on that in the near future. So this is my first time really doing a long recording like this and kind of just rambling on without too strict of a direction, but I wanted to test it out, see how it goes, and just find a nice way to create some different content while I'm away here in Oregon. So I'm going to be here for about 10 more days, and certainly going to enjoy being outdoors. It'll definitely be nice to be away from crowds and whatnot. Even though I'm staying at home, there's a lot of ambient noise around me. Not even ambient. You got a train. I live by a train station, and that hasn't let up very much. We got people in my complex who are doing these work requests for like plumbing and refurbishing and stuff like that, and it's just annoying as hell. Everyone's staying inside right now, and these people think it's okay to like just bang on the walls all day. So I was like, you know what, screw this. I'm getting out of here. I'm going to keep working, and I'm going to keep creating content, but with the intent of doing that 8 hours away. So I drove up here with my dog Cortana, and it is peaceful and lovely out here, and I think I kind of picked the best place. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and get into my history as a hockey fan. Now, growing up, I played a lot of sports, and I watched a lot of football, a lot of basketball. Didn't really get into hockey that much because I grew up in Monterey on the California coast. And so hockey was something that didn't really seem like it belonged in California at the time. My childhood years were the 1990s essentially. And so, the sport, there hadn't been a cup winner in California before. The Kings had made the cup finals in 93, but I grew up in Sharks territory, of course. And so I didn't really have many friends growing up who liked hockey. My couple of my best friends, my neighbors across the street, we would play, just on the driveway a little bit, and we'd play video games together like Wayne Gretzky's 3D hockey and stuff like that. And my other best friend, Thomas, who hooked me up with that awesome Danish jersey, he grew up watching the Sharks and liking the sport more than I did, really. But other than that, no one else was really cared about hockey so much. It was more about watching football and playing soccer mostly. And so really as a hockey fan, that didn't really hit me until early adulthood, really. So in high school, that's when the Sharks kind of started turning a corner. I mean, they had won a couple series, when I was a kid, but I hadn't really been watching them much. I would tune into like the cup finals once in a while a little bit, but usually for us it was about watching football, it was about watching baseball and basketball. So I really didn't gain an appreciation for the culture of the sport, I would say, until my early adult years. So when I was in high school, I had a couple of really close friends who I made then who got me into the Sharks more. And we were in high school during the 04-05 lockout, and I knew that they were certainly upset about that. And so, finally, when the lockout was lifted for the 05-06 season, that's when I really got into the Sharks. The season before then, they had gone to the conference finals against Calgary, and I did watch that. And it was frustrating that the Sharks couldn't, get over the hump there. But nonetheless, it was cool that the sport had some legs here. So the Sharks in the 05-06 season, that's when they got Joe Thornton. And so it was kind of an awesome time to be a fan because here they get like an absolute superstar. They didn't quite have that caliber of a player on the team before, I don't think. Definitely some good players. And then with Jumbo on the team, that's how Jonathan Chicho ended up scoring 56 goals that season. And of course, you had Evgeny Nabokov in net, and I was certainly a fan of his as well. And, with Patrick Marleau on the team as well, you had kind of the proto core for the San Jose Sharks. Eventually, they would add key pieces like Marc-Edouard Vlasic and Logan Couture. Not too far from that, actually. It's crazy to think. It just seems like it was so long ago when they were still wearing, the original logo on their jerseys. Now, speaking of the original logo, I was going to games a little bit growing up. I would go to maybe 1 or 2 games a year, because they were only 60 minutes away from where I grew up. So once in a while, my dad would get tickets through work or something like that. And when he would say, hey, I got Sharks tickets, we're going to go in 2 weeks or whatever, I thought that was the coolest thing. It was my favorite sport to watch in person. And I think a lot of people say that as well, because you seem a lot closer to it than you do when you go to a baseball game. You're closer to the action. The action is more ongoing than in most other sports, except for really soccer. And, there were other elements that you didn't quite get in sports. You had fighting, for example. And for some reason, I thought that was awesome. I was like, oh my God, these guys are punching each other. There's blood on the ice. And a couple of my favorite parts about going to the games were seeing S.J. Sharkey, especially when I was really young, 6 or 7 years old. And my dad would say, hey, we got tickets. I'd be like, oh, that's right. I get to go see Sharkey. This is amazing. So I would look forward to that and getting those malt ice creams. They were like in kind of like a cup of sorts, really. I loved that. That was my favorite part of going to the games. But I still wouldn't get into the Sharks very much until later on, in terms of actually watching them and following them in the off season and whatnot. Now, growing up, we didn't have an ice hockey program. I don't think anywhere within 40 miles of the Monterey Peninsula actually has ice hockey. We did have roller hockey, and a couple of my friends did that, but I never did because I was more interested and more skilled when it came to other sports. So I never really thought about playing it until college, actually. So it was interesting because when it came to applying for colleges, I wanted to go to USC. I wanted to go to University of Southern California. George Lucas went there, and Marcus Allen went there, and a lot of other famous athletes, celebrities, and whatnot. I wanted to work as a sports writer, a sports journalist. So that was the school I wanted to go to. I'd applied for other schools, and I had gotten into some other schools too. One of them being Santa Clara University, which is literally like 3 miles away from the Shark Tank. So when the letter came from USC, I'm a senior in high school, I see that it's a small envelope, and I say, oh shit, that's not good. So I open the envelope. So I open the letter, and it says that I've been waitlisted from the fall semester. So in other words, I could get in as an undergrad like right away for the fall, but they would have to let me know months later. And that means I got in for spring semester. So technically I got into USC. I got in where I wanted. But I didn't want to be stuck at home for another few months while my other friends were off at college. I grew up very fortunate. All my friends went to college. We had good educations, great parents and whatnot. So that's kind of how it was for me. So when it came on deciding where I was going to go instead, where I could start school in August or September, well, I thought to myself, all right, Santa Clara University. So I'm already pretty familiar with the campus. I'd been there a couple times. My sister finished her undergrad work there. And let's see, it's only 3 miles away from where the Sharks play. So that's pretty cool. One of my best friends is already going to school there. And the girls are pretty cute. So Santa Clara it is. And so I did all my undergrad there from 2006 until 2010. That was, again, the Sharks had been building their core during that time and were very competitive. And right from the get-go, right when I got to college, my buddy, Sam, he made sure that I was properly, I don't want to say indoctrinated, but initiated into the Sharks fandom. So we would watch, he would put the game on anytime. Like if I had to study for a midterm, no, Sharks were going on. If he had something else he was supposed to do, didn't matter. Sharks were going on. I remember one time we were out at a birthday dinner for a friend. I think it was the first game of the year or something. And we like, as soon as the check came, we threw in some cash and we just bolted. And we ran from essentially the other side of campus back to our dorm to watch the very end of the game. I mean, my friend was that rabid about them. Now, speaking of Mr. Sam, and God bless him, he's a great friend and a funny dude. When college had started, we went to like a club fair. So there are various clubs and organizations that are run by the students, and one of them was a club hockey program. So my friend Sam, he said, well, I played a little bit of roller. Seems like a great way to get kind of back into actually playing the sport. And I'm like, damn, like I wish I, could actually play. And I said, you know what? I'll go anyway. I figure, hey, I'll just shadow you and do everything you're doing so that we stay friends. I was like, I don't want to lose him as a friend. He's going to go off and find his own way in life. Well, anyway, we're still really good buddies to this day. So we go to the club fair, or to the club meeting, and there are probably a couple dozen guys there. And afterwards, I go up to the president and I say, hey, I've never really played hockey before, but I want to still kind of find a way to be involved with you guys. And so he says, well, you could, you're welcome to try out. I mean, that certainly doesn't guarantee a roster spot. But we're going to need a team manager. So, why don't you go ahead and stay in touch with us? So that's what I did. I said, all right, I don't think I'm cut out for playing this, but everybody here seems okay. My buddy's doing this and gets me a little bit more connected to one of the sports I like following. So that's what I did. I served as the team manager for the club ice hockey program my freshman and sophomore year. That was pretty fun. So we started my freshman year. We weren't in any sort of league. So we basically just spent a few months practicing at this small ice rink in Cupertino nearby, which is right next to the Apple campus, basically. And I would just kind of sit there and I would go refill waters and help players out in any other way that they needed help, I guess. Doesn't sound very glamorous, but it was cool. I just got to watch the sport in a way that I hadn't really before. I never had really watched teams practice, except for pregame warmups. So I kind of got a sense of what that was like. I got a sense of, what that locker room environment was like here and there. And overall, it was a pretty healthy one. Players were pretty amicable with each other. There were a couple of graduate students who were also able to join. And yeah, I had made a couple of friends through that. And there was, nice camaraderie overall. Nothing like the hazing stories that you hear in other programs, collegiate or otherwise. So overall, pretty good. Even though I was not on the team, the players were respectful toward me. And, it was always fun when I'd run into them on campus or when I'd run into them at a party. And definitely we did a little bit of partying together. So that was definitely fun. But the freshman year, or my first year, nothing really happened, right? We had like 1 or 2 exhibition games, and that was about it. So we needed to have that first year filled out on probation, essentially, in order to be considered to join a league the next year. And that's what we did. We joined, I think it was called the Pacific Collegiate Hockey League or Pacific Coast Hockey League or something like that. And so that meant we got to play teams mostly in Northern California, and we played some teams in Southern California as well because they were part of the PCHA South or PCHL South or something like that. But the main teams that we played were UC Davis, Sacramento State, which is also close to Davis. We played against Fresno State. We played Stanford, although they weren't part of the division with us. We also played San Jose State's B team, and San Jose State has a fantastic program, comparatively at least, because they actually practice at Solar for America Ice where the Sharks practice. Actually, we did too, my second year. But they have probably, they have way more students, first of all, and they've had a much more mature program over the years. They've been around longer. That's what I'm trying to say. It was cool. We'd get on a bus. I'd be dressed in a suit, but that was cool. We played against, did we play against Bakersfield as well? I guess that's about as far as I went. And the team, we had our ups and downs. We weren't the best, but at the end of the day, it was just kind of a cool experience I didn't expect to have in college. And while that was all happening, I did some other really neat things in college. I didn't have the best college experience. It was overall okay. I went through my ups and downs, but I had a couple of good outlets. The hockey team was one of them, and another great outlet for me was doing what I think was the best use of my time at Santa Clara, apart from being a rap artist. But I worked for the newspaper. I was a sports reporter, and I was very fortunate to get into that toward the end of my freshman year. I got to go to a lot of games. I would, come to practices or to the end of practices, chat with the coaches, chat with the players, chat with other sports figures in the area. And that was amazing. I had some great staff members with me, and I still talk to a couple of them now and then. And I, had a really neat evolution for that as well. Kind of started with, some basic profile stories and some game recaps. And then it evolved to talking to some really interesting people. I got to talk to a professional boxing referee who'd been retired, but he was actually the boxing referee in the film $1 Million Baby, the Clint Eastwood film with Hilary Swank. So that was amazing right there. He had some cool stories about that. I got to talk to a really close friend of Mike Singletary's, actually. This is when Singletary was the coach of the 49ers, and they practiced nearby in Santa Clara. One of my other great ones was when I got to talk to Brandi Chastain. A lot of you are probably like, wait, that sounds familiar. Yeah, she was part of the Women's World Cup team in 1998, and she's the one who scored the game-winning goal in the shootout, I think against China, and then she took her shirt off. She had her sports bra underneath. And yeah, it's just kind of one of the iconic moments in American sports right there. And she was just real down to earth, really approachable. And she's a Santa Clara alumna, so it was pretty easy getting in contact with her. Actually, her husband, I don't know if he still coaches the women's team, but yeah, that's, I think, kind of how we got that connection going. So really neat experiences through that. So I got to do that for a lot of my college time. And then I also had some people under me when I was the sports editor. And when that happened, I actually helped with covering college hockey, Santa Clara hockey. So I would actually assign people to go out there and go to the games and talk to the players and whatnot. So overall, really neat. Inside the classroom, not the most exciting, really. I studied communication. I studied journalism a little bit and digital media. So that kind of gave me a sense of, maybe I could actually work in video. I could work in sports in some capacity. And actually, my graphic design class, I think, was probably my favorite when I was in college right there. Just kind of applying some of those principles to what I do now. So that's kind of the height of my collegiate time. Now, I know I went into that for a while, but in parallel, while this was all going on, the Sharks were, in the middle of some serious contention, right? So my freshman year, they bowed out in the second round to the Red Wings. They nearly had a 3-1 series lead on them. And this was when I was probably the biggest believer in the Sharks. So that was freshman year. Sophomore year was that 4 overtime game against Dallas in the second round, which was an absolute heartbreak. If the Sharks found a way to win that game, I think they would have won Game 7 at home. That would have been a reverse sweep right there. But I can only think about what could have been. And to me, that's still the best. That might be the best Sharks team right there. I know that a lot of people would point to other teams, but I thought that one right there, they were kind of a sexy pick, but they weren't the Red Wings. I don't know. I thought that was the year they could have gotten it done. They would have played the Penguins if they went to the finals. But anyway, then in 2009, well, that season was interesting. The first half of my junior year, I actually was abroad in Copenhagen, in Denmark. While I was out there, the Sharks just were off to a sizzling start. I would get up sometimes, I don't know, 6 a.m, sometimes earlier. And that's pretty early for a college student, mind you. And I would tune into the games because in the Pacific time zone, if you're finishing a game at 10 o'clock, that's, I think, 7 o'clock in the morning, in Europe or in the main continental part of Europe. So I definitely, tried to watch what I could. While that was going on, I got to obviously do some traveling around Europe, which was amazing. I got to go to a European soccer match in Italy, and I saw Inter play over there. And at that time, Zlatan Ibrahimovic and Samuel Eto'o were on the team, so a couple of pretty high profile players there. And then on that same trip, I had also gone to Prague. And while I was in Prague, I got to go to a hockey game there between Prague's two teams. So HC Sparta was the host, and they were going up against Slavia. So basically, the way that I describe that is take a European soccer match, downsize it a ton to like 9 or 10,000 people, and put it indoors. And it's a blast, an absolute blast. You have, supporters groups on both sides, just constantly chanting the whole time. They had like pom-poms, they had tifo, when they like roll out these banners and they kind of like, move them around the crowd. It was terrific. And HC Sparta actually won that game 5-0, even though I think Slavia was the better team. I don't know how that happened, but it was crazy because when we went back to the subway station, the riot police were there. They had their shields and everything. So I guess things can get a little out of hand once in a while with these fan bases, but fortunately everything was safe. So yeah, that was a fantastic semester that I spent abroad. And I've done a lot of traveling, and I could talk about that for a long time. But nonetheless, I came back home. The Sharks continued a good season. They won their Lone President's Trophy. And then they managed to lose in the first round to the Ducks in one of the most embarrassing displays of postseason hockey. In all fairness, Jonas Hiller was a man possessed in that series, but it was embarrassing. The Sharks, that was maybe the height of their choker label. I don't know, you could argue that. And then my senior year, I actually took a job in Chicago. So I got a job with the Chicago Fire of Major League Soccer in sales, in ticket sales, which was one of the most challenging jobs I will ever work because you're cold calling. You're calling people who don't really have much of a relationship with your organization, and you're trying to sell them season tickets or group packages, or I think somebody bought a suite off of me one time too. But yeah, that was very difficult. I was doing that during the 2010 World Cup, and we thought that would actually help business, but instead it actually hurt business because a lot of the times people would say, well, you know what, I don't really watch Major League Soccer. I like European soccer. I like the Premier League. I like La Liga. I like Italian soccer. People didn't want to go and see MLS. And so that was difficult because here I am, dialing 80, sometimes 100 phone numbers a day, trying to get on the phone with somebody who says, you know what, that would be pretty fun for my family and me. Let's do a group outing, or like for my company and me. I was pretty good at it, but it was very challenging because there are factors that you can't quite control. And it's a numbers game. You have to meet your quota. Nonetheless, I was actually very fortunate to exceed my quota before the season ended, and that basically spurred me to come back to the Bay Area. Before that happened, of course, there were some Stanley Cup playoffs. And I remember on the last day of the season, I had a friend who had a cousin or an uncle in the west suburbs. And we went to watch the Blackhawks game on their TV, and they were playing the Red Wings. And I remember during intermission, his uncle had a wooden cutout with like holes in it, kind of like a hockey goalie, right? And he had a goal, and he put it out in the street, and we got to play street hockey in the west suburbs, just like Wayne's World. But yeah, that was super cool. But anyway, the Hawks were having a hell of a year. I think they made the playoffs for the second or third consecutive year. And Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews are just kids. They're like 22 years old maybe. So my Sharks go up in the first round against Colorado. And this is nothing like the Colorado Avalanche that we see now. So my Sharks, they survive a little bit of an early scare. They win the first round in 6 games, I think. Second round, they go up against Detroit. Kind of our bugaboo here. They'd beaten our butts the last couple of postseasons. They were still considered, I don't know about the cream of the crop, because we had won the Western Conference, or we had the best regular season, but still we had to get over a pretty big hump there, and people were still pretty high on Detroit. So it's game 2, and my friends in the area, they like the Blackhawks, and they also like the Sharks. And if you learned one thing about Blackhawks fans back then, they couldn't stand the Red Wings. So I told them, hey guys, I know of a Detroit sports bar not too far away from us. What if we showed up there and watched the Sharks, and I'll wear my Sharks jersey? And one of them said, I got 3 other jerseys. I'm going to put them on you guys. So here we go. The 4 of us roll into this bar in Sharks jerseys. The Tin Lizzie, good place. I don't know if it's still around anymore. And for 10 minutes, we are booed. Booed. Jeered. 10 minutes straight, we're just minding our business, watching the game. I don't even think we were drinking anything. Like, I didn't have the balls to go up to the bar. We don't take kindly to your type here. But then the Sharks are holding the lead, and sure enough, somebody comes over, not a staff member by any means, just a random fan with a Red Wings shirt or jersey on, brings us a tray of shots, and he's like, hey, this is for you guys. You guys got a lot of balls coming in here. So I was like, all right, that's respect. That's awesome. Anyway, the Sharks win that game, and as soon as that happens, I mean, I'm just like, all right, we're getting the hell out of here. Like, don't say anything to anybody. The Sharks win that series in 5 games. I had no idea that we were going to do that. I thought if we were going to win, it was going to be a 7-game series. Then we go up against the Blackhawks. And I'm basically the lone Sharks fan in all of Chicago. That's what it feels like. Game one, excuse me. The Sharks have home ice. I'm at a sports bar with these same guys, but now they're going for the Hawks. One of them's kind of like, I'll take either team because I like both of them. And yeah, we're at a sports bar. I'm probably the lone Sharks fan out of 150 or 200 people. I'm just really thankful that they served bottomless mimosas that day. Because I just kind of chased it away, frankly. We get pounded. The Sharks get absolutely pounded, and I'm nowhere to be found during this series. I'm just back at my apartment, watching online or watching on the TV, and I just want nothing to do with it. I get some people are poking at me a little bit, but I'm keeping my mouth shut. And if you look further in my channel, there is a video I have, one video in which I talk about the 10 worst Sharks playoff series of all time. I think that one for me was number 3. I want to say it was number 3, yeah. And I've got 2 that I know are ahead of that one, but it was awful because this team had such a great year, and then they just completely, went out with a whimper against Chicago. Sorry, there's a plane flying over me right now. So the Cup Finals come around, and I'm just like, yeah, I don't want anything to do with this. Like, get me out of here. Actually, literally, that's what I did because I flew back home for my graduation because I had graduated a few months early, and so I was literally at home when the Hawks won the Cup. I don't even think I was in town during the parade, and frankly, I didn't want to be because I was just like, nope, too embarrassing. This is too embarrassing. I can't stomach this defeat and watch everybody else bask in the glory of a Stanley Cup. Nope. Anyway, I came back home, and I won't go into every other year, but basically, over the next few years, yeah, of course I'm a Sharks diehard. Even when I lived in Chicago, I painted one of my walls deep Pacific teal intentionally. And for a few years there, I'm going to a few games a year. Fortunately, because a family friend has 6 season tickets in section 117 in like row 7 or 8, which is great. Now, I like to usually see all of the ice. So right now I sit, in the upper deck, and I perfectly love it. But nonetheless, when somebody says, hey, how would you like to be 7 rows up at a Sharks game? I say, when do you want me there? Name the game and I'm there. So yeah, I get to go to a few games a year. I get to go to a couple of playoff games. But the Sharks, of course, as we know, they don't quite get over the hump. Then I started getting like little 3-game plans. Later in the season, they would put those out when they were like, okay, we don't think we're going to sell out these games. So then I'd go to those, and I would take friends, who would do me a favor, do me a solid. And so I'd be like, all right, I'll bring you to a Sharks game for that. Thank you for helping me. 2016 comes around, Sharks make the Stanley Cup Finals, and I shelled out a grand total of over $1,200 to get 2 tickets for that. And of course, it's game 4, and we lose 3-1, really 2-1 with an empty netter, I think. And that was pretty forgettable, actually. That was a very boring game. The Sharks poured on not a bunch of shots, a decent amount of shots, but Matt Murray looked fantastic. And yeah, that's about it. I really don't have that much to share when it comes to actually going to the Stanley Cup Finals. However, I would kind of get a better playoff experience a couple years later. So then it's the, we'll flash forward, it's the 2018-2019 season, somebody reaches out to me from the Sharks front office and said, because they knew I'd bought tickets to a few games. And they said, well, what do you think about becoming a season ticket holder? And I think, well, sorry, but like, I don't have that kind of money. And like, that's 41 games. That's probably going to be a lot. And they said, all right, well, would you consider being a half season holder? And I said, well, ever since I was in college, I wanted to become a season ticket holder. And so, all right, I go to the Shark Tank to a informational shindig. I get to go to the seats that are available and pick out which one I want. And I threw down and I said, you know what? If I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right now. I want to be a season or a half season ticket holder. That's pretty amazing. And one big driver to that was because the pricing for playoff tickets was much better if you were a half season holder. Okay, I just switched positions if things sound a little bit different. My bad. But yeah, it's the 18-19 season. And so I have tickets to 20 games. And actually, that is a lot of games. If you split them with somebody, it's much more manageable. But there are times when you've got like a Saturday game and then a Monday game and then like a Tuesday game. You might have 3 games in 4 days. Like once in a while that might come up, or, you got like a back-to-back or, something like that. Or like a holiday is going to come up and you're like, well, I'm supposed to be traveling. Sorry if I'm saying like so much. I'm from California. And fortunately, that was the year when, the playoffs came around. The Sharks said, okay, like, do you want to purchase playoff tickets? And I said, yeah, let's go for it. And the way that they do it, you buy tickets to, it's a full package. So as a half season holder, I got 2 games per round. So that included the cup finals if they reached them. So yeah, I go to game 1 against Vegas and the Sharks win. They look really good. And I'm like, all right, this is great. Game 2, the Sharks lose. And I say, crap. Now reality is really setting in. So my friend, he asked me after game 5, after the Sharks were able to, push it one more further, he said, hey, if the Sharks win game 6, if they make it to game 7, we got to go. And I thought, dude, I just spent a bunch of money on playoff tickets. It's against Vegas. I don't want to be there during an elimination game. But I say, okay, fine, let's do it. I was there for game 7 against Vegas. I mean, most of you already know that, so I'm not going to get into it too much. Or if you don't know that, then definitely watch my vlog from that. But that was unbelievable. Clearly the best thing I've ever seen in hockey. Best moment I've ever seen was that power play. And I even knew that Vegas was going to tie it up before the end of the game. Like, I knew it. I was like, there's no way the Sharks are going to be able to hold this. Vegas is going to storm back. They can do it. They're that kind of team. Corsi gods of the Western Conference. And yeah, that happened. So it goes to overtime, and I'm like, crap. Like, you know what, though? Basically, the Sharks, they bought themselves an extra life. They were dead in the water. They bought themselves an extra life. So even if they lose this, it's okay. I already accepted earlier in the game the Sharks weren't going to win. And then, of course, Barclay Goodrow happens. My friend had said that Joe Thornton was going to be on the ice for the winning goal. And he was right. Jumbo actually came up with a contested puck that was the reason why, I don't know if he passed it to Erik Karlsson, or he came up with the contested puck and yeah, I think he probably passed it to Erik Karlsson, and then Karlsson saw Goodrow on the right side, and he found Goodrow, and Goodrow got around the defender. I can't remember if it's McNabb or Engeland, and then he scored the goal. And I was at that end of the ice where he scored, and I mean, I don't really remember what happened, just because it was that, that elation, that kind of like an out of body experience, but just the energy exiting the Shark Tank was unreal. Of course, I got to go to more playoff games that year against the Avalanche, so I saw them win game 1 and lose game 2. And the same was true when they played the Blues in the conference finals. Those were all, it was great. It was great going to all those games. Now, there are 2 more things that I want to touch on for this cast. So if there's something that I'm leaving out or something you're curious to know more about, let me know in the comments and I'll consider that for a future podcast. Anyway, first of all, I wanted to highlight that I've been to a couple of other arenas, which, not too many people get to do when you're on the West Coast and teams are so much further away. When I was 9 years old, I went to see the Phoenix Coyotes. I was with my family. My dad was on a business trip, and he said, all right, well, the kids like hockey. Let's go to a game. I can't remember what the name of that arena is called. It's not Gila River, because basically they were at another arena when they first, moved over from Winnipeg. So I got to see the Coyotes there. They were playing the Sabres, so I'm pretty sure I got to see Dominik Hasek back then. When the Sabres were wearing the goat head jerseys. Those are so sick. So literally, it was the Kachina against the goat head. Pretty awesome, huh? I wish I could. I don't know if my mom has any photos from that. I hope she does. I'll have to see if she can find any for me. I've also been to Tampa. Well, before that, I went to Boston. So I went to Boston in 2015, and my buddy and I went to a Bruins versus Red Wings game. So I think that was the second to last year for Pavel Datsyuk, and he scored like a sick breakaway goal. And the Bruins won too, so that was fun because, I was rooting for the home team then. We snuck down to the first level because somebody we ran into said, hey, there's nobody sitting down below next to me. Come join us. And so we did. That was great. So I've been to TD Garden. Definitely a much more vertical arena than I am used to with the Shark Tank. Yeah, so I went to Tampa in 2018. Basically went to Orlando on a trip that I had planned. The Lightning were in town against the Maple Leafs, so I went to see the Solar Bears in Orlando. Then the next day, I went to Tampa. I took a bus there from Orlando. It's like not even an hour and a half away. And then literally when that game got over, it was against the Maple Leafs, which was really fun because, half the fans were Toronto fans, and it was a great atmosphere there. But basically, that game gets over at about 10:30, local time. I go to a hotel bar, have a couple of drinks, and talk hockey with some folks. And then basically I hang out there till about, 12 or 12:30. I get in a Lyft and I take that out to the airport because I have a 5:30 a.m. flight. Then what happened was I went to the airport. Obviously it's middle of the night. I try to pass out on a bench for like an hour and a half or 2 hours. And then I get on my flight, get back to the Bay Area, go to work that day off of like basically no sleep. And I said, no guys, I got to tap out. I got to go home. So I go home at like 4 p.m. I grab a quick nap, and then I go to the Sharks game that night. It was insane. Okay, I decided to move things back inside. Pardon the echo, it's just the room that I'm in. But yeah, so I've been to Tampa, I've been to Arizona to see the Coyotes, I've been to Boston, and I've also been to Nashville. So I got to go there to see them play. Actually, they were playing the Tampa Bay Lightning. And Bridgestone Arena was a lot of fun as well. That atmosphere is actually pretty enjoyable. Of course, I'm sure it goes up another few levels in the playoffs, but nonetheless, definitely one of the more kind of like lively experiences I've had. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about that for a little bit. And then the other thing I wanted to touch on was basically how YouTube became kind of part of my evolution as a hockey fan. So it was the 2017-18 season, and I was working a job and had 2 monitors. So on one monitor, I'd be doing my actual work. And then on the other monitor, I would just be watching YouTube because I could essentially just kind of go into autopilot with my work because it was kind of repetitive, frankly, or at least a lot of it was. And so I would typically watch other sports channels and gaming channels as well. And so basically the first hockey channels that came up there that weren't, like Sportsnet or anything like that were from Post to Post and The Hockey Guy and Hands Down Hockey. So when I first saw those, the idea of kind of your own YouTube channel for something like that was a little strange to me, a little quirky. I see Neil with his set, and with his dad. I'm like, who are these guys anyway? Like, what kind of qualifies them to be on there? And I don't mean that condescendingly. I'm just inquisitive about this, really. But I was like, you know what though? They've got this, great chemistry on there. They're really friendly with the viewers. That's kind of cool. I think this is really neat. And of course, watching The Hockey Guy, Shannon's got this amazing command of hockey history. And I was just learning a lot about the history of the sport and kind of getting a sense of what it's like to be a hockey fan in other parts of the continent, because I hadn't really experienced that all too much. So I thought to myself, well, geez, I have a little bit of a video production background. I have a background managing online communities as well. Why not do this as well? Why not actually take this up as a bit of a hobby? I've always had some sort of hobby accompanying me, even if I'm working. I have something else that I think speaks more to my skills and interests. I've run a video games community. I have worked as a freelance reporter for a gaming website. I have also experimented a lot with music production too. Nothing that I'm proud to speak about too much, but yeah. So I thought to myself, all right, you know what? Maybe this is kind of the next hobby for me. I'll just fiddle around with YouTube and see how it goes. And man, it took so long until like any of my videos got more than I think 50 views or 100 views or something like that. But it's crazy to think that it started all the way back in like February of 2018. That's when I first uploaded a video, and then I had some photos and had some stories to share about going to Florida and to Tampa. So that was one of the early kind of travel videos, and it wasn't really a vlog, but essentially something kind of like that. And then eventually I would get to partner up with a couple of these channels and make content with them, Top Shelf Hockey and Hands Down Hockey and some other guys out there too. So anyway, that's kind of how YouTube sort of fit into that. And now, even though I'm not really the biggest expert when it comes to, talking about draft picks or talking about somebody's two-way game, I'm more invested with the culture of the sport more than ever. And the history of it to a degree as well. So that's kind of where I've ended up as a hockey fan. It all started with me, just loving watching the sport in person as a kid, to me becoming a San Jose Sharks diehard. And then it evolved to me following the league a little bit more, especially as the Sharks were more competitive. And then, of course, becoming part of the YouTube community and then creating some content on my own. So that's how things have kind of played out over the last 25 years, really. About 25 years ago was when I went to my first Sharks game, 25, 26 years ago. So a lot has happened during that time, especially after that 04-05 lockout. So anyway, I could talk about this forever, guys, but I want to open up the opportunity to create more podcasts like this and talk about things that are kind of relevant to this. So if you're curious to know any more about my background with hockey or sports in general, other, interests I have that might kind of relate to what I do on YouTube, let me know in the comments below. I'd be curious to hear your impressions of what I've done here. And hopefully I'll get to talk to you a little bit later as I continue to upload more videos and even do that from Oregon too. Anyway, guys, I'm going to go ahead and sign off now. Thanks so much for listening to my podcast, and I'll catch you later.